You know you've reached the absolute zenith of suburban dystopia when a piece of paper in your hand accuses a stationary metal box of being emotionally distressing to the neighborhood aesthetic. I stood at the end of my driveway, the asphalt radiating the kind of humid heat that makes your shirt stick to your back in under 30 seconds, staring at the offending object. It was a mailbox. A standard, matte black, U.S. Postal Service approved metal mailbox. It sat atop a 4x4 wooden post. It had a red flag on the side. It opened, it closed, it held bills and junk mail with the stoic reliability of a golden retriever. And yet, according to the letter currently trembling in my clenched fist, this mailbox was an eyesore, a blight, and, my personal favorite, aesthetically aggressive. Aesthetically aggressive, I muttered to myself, reading the phrase for the 10th time. It's a box, Linda. It doesn't have fists. I looked up the street. The neighborhood of Whispering Willows was the kind of place where the grass was so green it looked radioactive, and the silence was heavy enough to crush a soda can. It was a beige prison of conformity. And the warden of this prison was currently cruising toward me in a customized candy apple red golf cart that cost more than my first car. Mrs. Linda Higgins, the HOA president, the Karen to end all Karens, the final boss of suburbia. She didn't just drive the golf cart. She piloted it like she was patrolling the DMZ. She wore a visor that was structurally larger than her head, and her sunglasses were big enough to cover the fact that she was constantly judging your soul. She pulled up to the curb, the electric motor whining down to a halt, and stared at me. She didn't say hello. She just tapped a manicured fingernail against the steering wheel. "I see you got the notice, Robert," she said. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping against a sidewalk. I held up the letter. "I got something, all right. Linda, what is this? Violation of Code 4.2, curbside appeal? It's a mailbox. It's been there for 3 years. And for 3 years, I have been incredibly patient," she sighed, as if my mailbox had been personally insulting her ancestors since the dawn of time. She stepped out of the cart. She was wearing a polo shirt with the HOA crest embroidered on it. I didn't even know we had a crest. "But look at it, Robert. Just look at it." I looked. It was black. It had a small scratch on the side where I'd accidentally clipped it with the weed whacker last summer. That was it. "It's chipped," she said, pointing a finger like a loaded weapon. "The paint is compromised. Rust is inevitable. Rust, Robert, is the cancer of the suburbs. It suggests neglect. It suggests that you simply don't care." "It's a half-inch scratch," I argued, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my voice and failing miserably. "I can hit it with some spray paint this afternoon. Problem solved." "No," she said sharply. "Absolutely not. We are trying to elevate the tone of Whispering Willows. We want uniformity, yes, but we also want stature. That tin can on a stick? It's pedestrian. It's lazy. It doesn't reflect the property values we are striving for." I felt a vein in my forehead start to throb. This was about the 3rd time she'd targeted me this month. First, it was my trash cans being out at 6:00 p.m. when the limit was 5:00 p.m. Then, it was the fact that my porch light was too warm of a yellow. Now the mailbox. "Okay, Linda," I said, crossing my arms. "So what do you want me to do? Buy a new black box?" She laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound. "Oh, Robert, you lack vision. I don't want you to just buy a box. I want you to replace the entire structure. The board has decided that the standard wooden posts are too rustic. We want masonry. We want columns. We want bold statements. Bold statements, I repeated. Yes, she said, stepping closer, invading my personal space with the scent of expensive perfume and malice. I want something that says, I take pride in my home. Something that stands out, yet fits in. Something with character. Honestly, I don't care what you put there, as long as it's big, distinct, and follows the federal-approved dimensions for large parcels. She reached into the back of her golf cart and pulled out a binder that was roughly the thickness of a metropolitan phone book. She shoved it into my chest. Here are the bylaws, she said. Section 12 through 15 covers curbside structures. You have 14 days to rectify the situation, or the HOA will hire a contractor to install a compliant structure and bill you for the cost, plus a 15% administration fee. I took the binder. It was heavy. 14 days? Linda, I have a job. I can't just erect a monument in 2 weeks. That sounds like a you problem, Robert, she said, climbing back into her cart. She adjusted her visor. Just make it look like you actually live in this tax bracket. Be bold. Surprise me. She reversed the cart with a whine of electricity and sped off toward the Johnsons' house, presumably to measure their grass height with a micrometer. I stood there for a long time, holding the binder. The heat was baking my brain, but a cold, icy resolve was starting to form in my gut. Be bold, she had said. Surprise me. I looked at my sad, scratched black mailbox. Then I looked at the binder. Challenge accepted, I whispered. That night, my dining room table looked like the war room from a spy thriller. I had a pot of coffee brewing, a 6-pack of IPA in the fridge, and the Whispering Willows Homeowners Association covenants, conditions, and restrictions spread open in front of me. I was 3 hours in, and my eyes were starting to cross. Most people would have just gone to Home Depot, bought a brick pillar kit, and called it a day. But I am not most people. I am a man with a decent amount of disposable income, a background in mechanical, engineering, and a level of pettiness that borders on pathological. Linda wanted a war? I was going to give her a nuclear winter. I was hunting for loopholes. Section 12, A, Materials, I read aloud, dragging a highlighter across the page. Mail receptacles must be constructed of durable materials, including but not limited to brick, stone, cast aluminum, or treated hardwood. Okay, standard stuff. But notice the phrase, including but not limited to. That was a door left slightly ajar. I flipped the page. Section 13.c. Color. This was usually where they got you. Most HOAs demanded earth tones or neutral palettes. I scanned the text, ready to be disappointed. All standard mailboxes must conform to the approved neighborhood palette: beige, taupe, slate gray, or forest green. My heart sank. I took a sip of beer. So I was stuck with boring colors. But then I saw an asterisk. Except in cases where the structure is classified as a specialty security parcel drop or custom architectural feature exceeding 4 cubic feet in internal volume. In such instances, to ensure visibility for delivery vehicles and prevent collision, the structure may utilize high-visibility safety colors or aesthetically distinct finishes, provided it remains within the property line. I froze. I reread it 3 times. Specialty security parcel drop, I mused. High-visibility safety colors. I grabbed my laptop and furiously typed into Google, "What constitutes a high-visibility safety color?" The results came back: neon yellow, safety orange, and police blue. Specifically, Pantone 21955C, the color of authority. The color of safety. The color of a TARDIS. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I flipped to Section 14, Dimensions. This was the big one. If they had a height limit of 4 feet, my plan was dead. Standard mailboxes shall not exceed 48 inches in height. Damn. But I kept reading. I knew Linda. She loved bureaucracy. She loved complex rules. There had to be an exception for larger packages. However, the text continued, in accordance with the modernization of delivery services and the increase in e-commerce, residents are permitted to install large parcel secure units. These units, designed to prevent package theft, may have a maximum footprint of 40 inches by 40 inches and a maximum height of, I held my breath, 72 inches, 6 feet, excluding decorative finials or lighting elements. 6 feet, plus a decorative finial. I sat back in my chair, a grin stretching across my face that would have terrified a shark. A TARDIS, a Type 40 time travel capsule, is essentially a police box. A police box is tall, blue, and boxy. I did the math. If I scaled it down just slightly, I could build a TARDIS replica that was exactly 6 feet tall at the roofline. The light on top? That counts as a decorative lighting element. The color? High visibility safety blue for the security parcel drop. The best part? Linda had specifically demanded I build something bold and distinct. She had handed me the sword I was about to impale her with. But I couldn't just build a wooden box. That was amateur hour. Linda had insulted my pride. She had questioned my commitment. If I was going to do this, I had to do it right. It needed to be a functioning piece of engineering art. I grabbed a fresh sheet of graph paper and a pencil. Project: Malicious Time Lord. Specs: exterior: marine-grade plywood and fiberglass, painted Pantone 295C. Lighting: solar-powered LED lantern on top, the finial. Interior: here was the kicker. I wanted it to feel bigger on the inside. I couldn't actually warp space-time. My budget wasn't that high, but I could use mirrors and forced perspective. The drop mechanism, a motorized carousel. When the mailman opens the pull-to-open door, he places the mail on a tray. A sensor trips, the tray rotates back into the locked body of the TARDIS, and, this was crucial, it triggers a sound module. I pulled up a sound file on my phone. The grinding, wheezing, groaning sound of the universe's most famous time machine landing. VWOORP. VWOORP. I laughed aloud in the empty kitchen. It was a manic sound. You want bold, Linda? I said to the empty room. I'm going to give you interdimensional travel. But I couldn't build this alone. I'm handy, but I'm not a master carpenter. I needed someone who knew structural integrity, someone who could pour a concrete pad that could withstand a nuclear blast, someone who hated authority as much as I did. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name. Sully. Construction. It was 10:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. Sully was probably awake. Sully was always awake. I hit dial. Yeah? A voice answered on the second ring. It sounded like gravel being crushed in a blender. Sully, it's Robert, from the Elm Street job last year. Robert, Sully grunted. The guy who paid me in cash and premium bourbon. I remember. What broke? Nothing broke, Sully. I need to build something. Something specific. I don't do illegal, Robert, unless the money is right. Then I do creatively permitted. It's not illegal, I said, looking at the binder. It is technically, specifically, and legally compliant with every single syllable of my HOA bylaws. But it is going to piss off the HOA president so much that she might spontaneously combust. There was a pause on the line. Then I heard the distinct sound of a lighter flicking and a long inhale. "I'm listening," Sully said. "I need to build a 6-foot-tall reinforced security column on my curb, but I need it to look exactly like a 1960s British police box. And I need it done in 14 days. "A police box," Sully repeated. "Like Doctor Who?" I blinked. "You know Doctor Who, Sully. I got 3 ex-wives and insomnia, kid. I watch a lot of PBS. You want a TARDIS? I want a working TARDIS, Sully, with lights and fog." I could hear the smile in his voice. It was a terrifying thought. "I'm booked up until November building decks for yuppies," Sully said. "But for this, I'll clear my schedule. I hate HOAs. I had a lady once try to fine me because my work truck was too dusty. When do we start?" "Tomorrow morning," I said. "Bring the concrete saw. We're going to make some noise." I hung up the phone and looked at the binder one last time. I closed it with a satisfying thud. The war had begun, and I had just called in the cavalry. The next morning, the sun rose over whispering willows like a spotlight turning on in an interrogation room. I was sitting on my front porch, a mug of coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. It was the calm before the construction storm. At exactly 7:59 a.m., 1 minute before the HOA noise ordinance allowed for heavy machinery operation, a truck turned the corner. It wasn't just a truck. It was a war rig. It was a Ford F-350 that had seen things, terrible things. It was covered in dents, dried mud, and a bumper sticker that simply read, "I'm contractor, not a magician. Just kidding, I can fix your screw-up." Sully had arrived. He pulled up to the curb, right next to the condemned black mailbox. The truck idled with a diesel rumble that shook the dew off my hydrangeas. Sully stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, built like a vending machine wrapped in flannel. He wore work boots that were older than me, and a tool belt that looked like it contained the secrets of the universe. He slammed the door, adjusted his cap, and looked at the mailbox. Then he looked at me. He didn't wave. He just nodded at the offending metal box. "That the victim?" he grumbled, his voice sounding like tires rolling over gravel. "That's the victim," I confirmed, walking down the driveway to meet him. "HOA says it lacks stature." Sully spat on the ground, not on the sidewalk, but precisely on the patch of dirt where the new foundation would go. A professional courtesy. "Stature, right. Let's see these plans of yours, Einstein." I unrolled the large sheets of graph paper on the hood of his truck. I had spent the better part of the night drafting them. I'm an engineer, not an architect, but I know my way around CAD software. The drawings were precise. Sully leaned in, squinting against the morning sun. He traced a thick, calloused finger over the lines. "Okay," he muttered. "Footprint is 40 by 40. Height is 72 inches. Tapered roof. Decorative bevels." He paused at the cutaway view of the interior. "Robert, why is there a dedicated circuit breaker labeled Special Effects?" "Because," I said, pointing to the schematic, "when the mail slot is opened, this sensor here trips. It triggers a 12-volt relay. That relay powers a strip of high-lumen LEDs in the top lantern and a small smoke emitter located in the base." Sully looked at me. He looked back at the drawing. "Smoke emitter. Water vapor, technically. It's safe. And the CAS, sound system? Bluetooth-enabled weatherproof marine speakers, hidden behind the police public call box sign. Sully straightened up and crossed his massive arms. You are aware that I usually build decks, right? Or pergolas. Occasionally a retaining wall. You're asking me to build a prop from a sci-fi show that functions as a federal mail receptacle. Can you do it? Sully grinned. It was a terrifying sight. Kid, I can build anything. The question is, do you want this thing to just look sturdy, or do you want it to survive the apocalypse? Mrs. Higgins drives a golf cart, but she has the spirit of a tank commander, I said. I want it to survive a direct impact. Then we don't use wood for the core, Sully said, pulling a pencil from behind his ear and scribbling over my carefully drawn wood framing. We use steel box tubing. We anchor it 4 feet down into concrete. We clad it in marine-grade plywood for the look, but underneath, it'll be a bunker. If someone hits this with a baseball bat, the bat shatters. If a car hits it, the car folds. Perfect, I said. How much? Sully did some mental math, staring at the sky. Materials are going to be high. Steel ain't cheap. Plus the electronics work. I gotta call my Sparky Dave. Dave's weird. He'll like this. Call it $3 grand. Maybe 4 if we run into rocks digging the footer. $4,000 for a mailbox. It was financial insanity. It was the price of a used Honda Civic. It was enough to fly to Europe. Do it, I said without hesitation. The look on Linda's face was going to be priceless. Therefore, any price was acceptable. Right, Sully said, rolling up the plans. First things first. We need a permit. If we start digging without a city permit, your HOA lady shuts us down in 10 minutes. If we have a city permit, she can scream all she wants, but the city trumps the HOA. I'm on it, I said. I'm heading to City Hall now. Go, Sully barked. I'll go to the supply yard. I need to find paint that screams, "Arrest me blue." The Department of City Planning was a fluorescent-lit purgatory where dreams went to die while waiting for ticket number B45. I sat in a plastic chair, clutching my folder of documents. I had purged the plans of any references to Doctor Who, TARDIS, or time travel. As far as the city of generic American suburbia was concerned, I was applying for a permit to install a custom masonry and composite security column with low-voltage landscape lighting. Finally, a monotone voice called out, "Number B12. I walked up to the counter. The clerk, a man named Gary, who looked like he had been born wearing a short-sleeved dress shirt and a tie that was too short, didn't look up from his computer. Address? Gary asked. 1402 Whispering Willows Lane. Project type? Roadside masonry structure. Replacement of damaged mailbox with high security parcel drop. Gary sighed, the weight of 1,000 permit applications pressing on his soul. Setback. From the curb? 18 inches. Height? 6 feet. Gary stopped typing. He looked up over his glasses. 6 feet? For a mailbox? It's a security column, I corrected smoothly. For large parcels, to deter porch pirates. It's fully compliant with the new anti-theft municipal recommendations. I had made that recommendation up completely, but it sounded bureaucratic enough to work. Gary squinted at me. And the lighting? Low voltage, solar, strictly for safety and visibility, to prevent collisions. Gary stared at me for a long, agonizing 5 seconds. I maintained eye contact, channeling my inner, boring person. I needed to be uninteresting. I needed to be just another guy worried about his Amazon packages. Fine, Gary said, stamping a piece of paper with a rhythmic teach thump. Here's your placard. Post it where it's visible from the street. Don't hit the water main. I took the permit like it was the Holy Grail. Thank you, Gary. You're a patriot. Next, Gary droned. I returned home to find chaos. Beautiful, industrial chaos. Sully hadn't just arrived with a shovel. He had brought a mini excavator. It was parked on my front lawn, its treads digging slightly into the manicured fescue. 2 other guys, Sully's crew, were already working. One was using a concrete saw to cut a perfect square out of the sidewalk. The noise was deafening. Screeka! Dust plumed into the air, drifting lazily toward Mrs. Higgins' prize-winning rose bushes across the street. I walked up to Sully, waving the orange permit card like a flag of victory. "We're legal," I shouted over the saw. Sully gave me a thumbs up and pointed to the hole. "Good, because we just hit a root ball the size of a Volkswagen. We're gonna need more concrete." I taped the permit to the existing, soon-to-be-executed, mailbox post. It was a shield, a talisman against evil, and right on cue, evil arrived. I didn't see her at first, but I felt the disturbance in the force. The grinding of the concrete saw stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was heavy. I turned around. Mrs. Higgins was standing at the edge of my property line. She wasn't in her golf cart this time. She had marched over on foot, which meant she was truly angry. She was wearing a floral blouse and holding a phone, likely with 911 pre-dialed. "Robert!" she screeched. Her voice cut through the construction dust like a laser. "What in God's name is happening here?" I walked over to her, putting on my best innocent neighbor face. "Good morning, Linda. Just taking care of that violation you sent me. You said you wanted bold, right?" She pointed a trembling finger at the mini excavator. "I said replace the mailbox. I didn't say turn your front yard into a strip mine. What is that? That machine." "That's an excavator, Linda," Sully said, walking up behind me. He was holding a sledgehammer, resting it casually on his shoulder. He looked like a Viking who had shopped at Carhartt. "We're digging the footer. Gotta go deep for stability." Linda looked at Sully, then at me, then at the hole. "A footer? For a mailbox? You just dig a hole and put a post in." "Not for this, ma'am," Sully said, his voice dripping with mock seriousness. "The specs Robert gave me. Well, this is heavy-duty stuff. Seismic rated. Category 5 wind load. You could park a truck on this thing." Linda's eyes narrowed. She looked at the permit taped to the post. She squinted at the text. "Custom security column?" she read. She looked up at me, her eyes flashing with suspicion. "Robert, what exactly are you building? Is it brick? Is it stone? It better not be stucco. Stucco is forbidden in Phase 2 of the development." "It's a composite shell with a steel core," I said, technically telling the truth. "And don't worry about the style. It's a classic British design. Very historic. Mid-century modern, technically." "British design?" She seemed momentarily placated by the word British. She probably imagined a red phone booth. "Well, I suppose that sounds acceptable, but the size! Look at that hole!" "Federal approved dimensions," I reminded her. "Large parcel secure unit. It's all in the binder you gave me, Linda, Section 14. She bristled. She hated it when people used the binder against her. "Well, make sure it's clean. And get that machine off the grass by 5 p.m. If there are tire marks, that's a separate violation." "We'll resod if we have to," I promised. She turned to leave, but stopped. She looked at Sully, then at the pile of dirt. "It better be tasteful, Robert. If I see one gargoyle or one tacky address plaque, I will fine you until you are bankrupt." "Taste is subjective, Linda," I called after her as she marched away. "But I promise, this will be iconic." Sully waited until she was out of earshot. "She seems nice." "She's a nightmare," I said. "Yeah, well," Sully turned back to the hole. "We're gonna make her life miserable." "Hey, Dave," he shouted at the guy with the concrete saw. "Cut it deeper! We need room for the conduit!" The rest of the afternoon was a blur of activity. I watched in awe as Sully and his crew, Dave and a quiet guy named Manny, transformed my curb. They poured concrete. They set 4 vertical steel beams that looked like they were intended to hold up a skyscraper, not a mailbox. Then came the wiring. I had to get involved for this part. I ran a heavy-duty extension cord through a PVC pipe underground, connecting it to the external outlet on my garage. "You sure this is gonna work?" Dave asked. Dave was the Sparky. He looked like he had been electrocuted a few times in his life, hair standing up in random directions, eyes wide. He was holding the motion sensor I had bought online. "It's a simple circuit," I explained, stripping a wire. "Power comes in here, passes through the transformer, steps down to 12 volts. When the sensor beam is broken, i.e., when the mailman puts his hand in, it sends the signal to the Arduino board I programmed." Dave looked at the Arduino board. "You programmed a computer chip for a mailbox?" "I did." "Why?" "Spite, Dave. Pure, unadulterated spite." Dave nodded solemnly. "I respect that. I once wired a guy's doorbell to flush his toilet just to mess with him. I get it." By 6:00 p.m., the skeleton was done. It was just a steel frame sticking out of the ground, wrapped in yellow caution tape. It looked ugly. It looked industrial. Linda drove by twice. She slowed down, staring at the steel beams. I could see her mouthing the word hideous. I waved. She didn't wave back. That night, Sully and I stood in my garage, looking at the pile of wood we had cut. The shell. We had cut the marine plywood into the distinctive panels of the TARDIS. We had the corner posts. We had the police public call box signs, which I had custom ordered from a vinyl shop downtown, telling them it was for a play. "We assemble the shell here," Sully said, drinking a beer. "Paint it here. Then on Saturday morning we carry it out, slide it over the steel frame, and bolt it down. Boom. Instant monument." "Saturday morning," I said. "That's when everyone is outside washing their cars." "Exactly," Sully grinned. "We give 'em a show." I picked up the can of paint. Pantone 2955C. I popped the lid. It was a deep, rich, beautiful blue. "Let's get painting," I said. For the next 3 nights, my garage was a sweatshop. I smelled like paint thinner and sawdust. My hands were permanently stained blue. I slept 4 hours a night. I soldered the LEDs for the lantern on top. I tested the sound module over and over again until I heard VWORP, VWORP in my dreams. I installed the fog machine, a small unit usually used for Halloween parties, and filled the reservoir with juice. We built the working interior. Sully constructed a beautiful rotating carousel out of aluminum. You opened the little doors, placed the mail on the tray, and the tray spun around into the secure box, triggered by the closing of the doors. It was over-engineered. It was unnecessary. It was magnificent. By Friday night, the TARDIS was standing in the center of my garage. It was perfect. The paint gleamed. The pull to open sign was crisp white on black. It looked like it had just dematerialized from the set of the show and landed next to my lawnmower. Sully wiped his hands on a rag. "Well," he said, admiring his handiwork, "that is definitely not earth tones." "No," I agreed, "it is not. Mrs. Higgins is going to have a stroke." "We can only hope, Sully. We can only hope." I looked at the blue box. It was huge. It was undeniable. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever owned. "Tomorrow," I said, "we invade." Moving a time machine is significantly heavier than they make it look on television. On the show, the TARDIS lands with a graceful wheeze. In real life, it requires 3 grown men, a dolly rated for industrial refrigerators, and a string of profanities that would make a sailor blush. It was 6 a.m. on Saturday. The sun hadn't even fully committed to rising yet. It was just a bruised purple smudge on the horizon. We were trying to move the asset from the garage to the curb before the neighborhood woke up. We wanted the element of surprise. We wanted shock and awe. "Lift with your legs, Manny," Sully hissed, his face turning a shade of red that rivaled Mrs. Higgins' golf cart. "If you drop this, we fracture the fiberglass, and I am not sanding this thing down again." "It's top-heavy," Manny grunted, clutching the corner post. "Why is it so top-heavy?" "Because the roof houses a fog machine and a high-output speaker system, Manny," I whispered loudly, steering the dolly. "It's technology. Respect it." We looked like a burglary crew in reverse. We wrestled the blue beast down the driveway, the wheels of the dolly crunching over the concrete. The structure was massive. Standing next to it in the garage was one thing, but out here, against the backdrop of manicured lawns and stunted dogwood trees, it looked gargantuan. It was an alien object, a monolith of pop culture invading the beige sanctity of whispering willows. We reached the steel skeleton we had planted earlier in the week. This was the moment of truth. Sully had welded mounting brackets onto the steel core. The wooden shell had to slide over it like a glove. "On 3, Sully commanded. 1, 2, 3, heave!" We lifted. There was a moment of weightlessness where I was sure my spine was going to exit my body. And then, clunk. It slid down. Perfect fit. Sully immediately grabbed his impact driver. Zip, 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 zip. He bolted the shell to the frame with 4 massive lag bolts. It was anchored. It was solid. You could drive a Hummer into it, and the Hummer would lose. "Cover it," I ordered. "Cover it now." We threw a massive, heavy-duty silver tarp over the structure and bungee corded it tight around the base. I stepped back to admire our handiwork. It looked suspicious. Wrapped in the tarp, it didn't look like a mailbox. It looked like we were hiding a ballistic missile, or perhaps a frozen body standing upright. It was a 6-foot-tall silver pillar of mystery, standing right on the curb. "That," Sully said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "is going to get some attention." "Good," I said. "Let them wonder." By 9 a.m., the wondering had begun. I sat in my living room, peering through the blinds like a paranoid shut-in. The neighborhood was waking up. Joggers were jogging. Dog walkers were walking. And every single one of them stopped at the end of my driveway. They would stop. They would look at the silver monolith. They would tilt their heads. I saw Mr. Henderson from down the street, a man who usually only cared about the pH balance of his pool, stop his golden retriever. He stared at the tarp. He reached out and poked it. It was solid wood underneath. He looked confused. He looked at my house, then shrugged and kept walking. But the real threat wasn't Mr. Henderson. At 10:15 a.m., the red golf cart appeared. I stiffened. Mrs. Higgins. She didn't just drive by. She stopped. She parked the cart right in front of the tarp. She got out. She circled it like a shark circling a shipwreck. She tried to peek under the bottom edge, but we had cinched it too tight. She pulled out her phone. I could see her lips moving. She was making a call. I knew exactly who she was calling. "Battle stations," I muttered to myself. I text Sully. "Target is on site. She's making the call." Sully texted back. I'm at Home Depot getting more screws. Don't let her touch it. I went outside. I had to run interference. Morning, Linda, I called out, walking down the driveway with a forced cheerfulness that hurt my face. Lovely day for a patrol. She spun around, phone clutched to her ear. She looked at the tarp, then at me, her eyes wide with horror. Robert, she said, her voice trembling with rage. What is that? That? I pointed to the silver obelisk. That is the new secure parcel structure, just waiting for the sealant to cure. Can't expose it to direct sunlight for 24 hours. Manufacturer's instructions. It's huge, she sputtered. It's enormous. Robert, that is not a mailbox. That is a monument. It blocks the sight lines. It violates the spirit of the neighborhood. It fits the dimensions, Linda, I said calmly. Height, width, setback, all compliant. We'll see about that, she snapped. I have city code enforcement on speed dial. They're coming out to verify the measurements. If this thing is 1 inch over the limit, I am going to make you tear it down with your bare hands. Bring 'em on, I said, my heart racing slightly. I knew the measurements were right. I hoped the measurements were right. I'll have the tape measure ready. She glared at me, then marched back to her cart. Don't unwrap that thing until the inspector gets here. I want witnesses. She sped off. I looked at the tarp. Don't worry, girl, I whispered to the box. She can't hurt you. The rest of the day was spent working inside the tarp. It was 90 degrees outside, which meant it was approximately 140 degrees inside the tarp. It was like doing electrical work inside a baked potato. I had cut a small slit in the back of the tarp to crawl in. I sat on the concrete curb, cross-legged, surrounded by tools. I had to wire the guts. Okay, I muttered to myself, sweat dripping onto the Arduino board. Red is power, black is ground, yellow is the sensor. I connected the carousel motor. This was the pièce de résistance. I had salvaged the motor from an old garage door opener. It had torque. I wired the internal button. When the mail flap, the pull to open sign, was pulled down, it would trigger the switch. Click. The motor whirred. The aluminum tray inside spun smoothly, rotating from the public slot to the secure inner chamber. Beautiful, I whispered. Now for the sound. I connected the Bluetooth speaker. I synced it to the board. I triggered the switch again. VWOOORP. OWOORP. VWOOORP. The sound was loud. Even inside the tarp, it was unmistakable. Suddenly, the tarp was slapped from the outside. Hey, a voice shouted. It was Sully. Keep it down in there. You sound like a dying radiator. I poked my head out through the slit. I looked like a coal miner, face streaked with grime and sweat. It works, Sully. It works perfectly. Sully looked down at me. Great. Drink some water. The inspector is here. I scrambled out of the tarp. A white city sedan had pulled up behind Mrs. Higgins's golf cart. A man in a short-sleeve white shirt and a clip-on tie was stepping out. He held a clipboard. He looked like he had been tired since 1998. This wasn't Gary from the permit office. This was the field inspector, the grim reaper of code violations. His name tag read Vance. Mrs. Higgins was practically vibrating with excitement. She pointed at the tarp. There! Look at it! It's a monstrosity! It's a hazard! It's probably radioactive! Inspector Vance sighed. He walked over to the tarp. He looked at me. You the homeowner? Yes, sir, Robert. Permit? I handed him the orange card. He checked it against his clipboard. Says here masonry and composite security column. 6 feet max height. He tapped the tarp. Take it off. I can't take it all off, I lied, glancing at Mrs. Higgins. The paint is still curing, UV sensitive. Can we measure it with the tarp on, or just lift the bottom? I need to measure the structure, not the tarp, Vance said monotone. Fine, I said. Sully, lift the skirt. Sully lifted the bottom 2 feet of the tarp. Vance pulled out a heavy-duty metal tape measure. He knelt down. Setback, he mumbled. He measured from the curb to the front face of the box. Mrs. Higgins leaned in, her nose practically touching the tape. Well, is it too close? It looks too close. Vance squinted. 18 inches exactly. Code requires minimum 12. It's fine. Mrs. Higgins let out a frustrated huff. Measure the width. It's too wide. It blocks the view of the fire hydrant. The fire hydrant was 3 houses away. Vance stood up. He measured the width of the base. 40 inches, Vance said. Ha! Linda shouted. 40! The limit is 40. So, it meets the limit, Vance said slowly. But surely the tarp adds width, she grasped. I'm measuring the wood, ma'am, Vance said, sounding bored. Now the height. This was the big one. The TARDIS had a slanted roof and a lantern on top. The code said 72 inches excluding decorative finials. I held my breath. I knew the roof peak was exactly 71.5 inches, but if the concrete pad was slightly uneven, if the wood had swollen in the humidity. Vance extended the tape measure up the side of the tarp. He felt for the top of the wooden roof through the plastic. He held the tape there. He looked at the number. He looked closer. Mrs. Higgins was holding her breath. Well, she squeaked. Is it 7 feet? It looks like 7 feet. Vance retracted the tape with a loud snap. 71.5 inches, he announced. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Sully smirked. Impossible, Mrs. Higgins shrieked. You measured wrong. What about that lump on top? She pointed to the lantern shape under the tarp. That's a light fixture, I interjected quickly. Decorative finial, Section 14, Paragraph B. Excluded from vertical maximums provided it does not exceed 12 inches. Vance looked at the lump. Is it a light? Solar powered, I said. For safety. Vance nodded. He made a check mark on his clipboard. It's compliant. You can't be serious, Mrs. Higgins yelled. She was turning a shade of purple that clashed with her golf cart. It's an eyesore. It's looming. I want you to cite him for aesthetic disharmony. Vance looked at Mrs. Higgins. He looked her dead in the eye. Ma'am, I check for inches and feet. I don't check for feelings. The box is legal. Have a nice day. He turned and walked back to his car. The silence that followed was delicious. It was thick and sweet, like honey. I turned to Mrs. Higgins. She was trembling. She looked at the tarp, then at me. This isn't over, Robert, she hissed. I don't know what you're hiding under there, but when that tarp comes down, if there is one thing out of place, one logo, one non-approved font, it's just a security box, Linda, I said, smiling. Trust me, it's going to be timeless. She stomped back to her cart and peeled out, her tires actually chirping on the asphalt. Sully walked up to me and clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. 71.5 inches, he chuckled. You cut it close, kid. Precision engineering, Sully, I said. Precision engineering. That night was the final prep. The inspector was gone. Linda was retreating to regroup. The neighborhood was asleep. At 11:00 p.m., I went out to the box. I crawled under the tarp one last time. I had one final component to install: the fog machine reservoir. I filled it with high-density fog fluid. I connected the power. I armed the system. I stood there in the dark, under the tarp, with a flashlight. I looked at the front of the TARDIS. The police public call box sign was obscured by the darkness, but I knew it was there. I ran a final diagnostic on my phone app. Yes, I built a Bluetooth app for my mailbox. Lights, green. Sound, green. Carousel. Motor, green. Fog emitter, green. It was alive. I crawled out and secured the tarp. I walked back toward the house, stopping on the porch to look back. It stood there, a silent sentinel. Tomorrow was Sunday, the Lord's Day. Also, the day everyone in Whispering Willows washed their cars, walked their babies, and gossiped on the sidewalk. Tomorrow, at 10 o'clock a.m., the tarp was coming down. I went inside and opened a beer. I sat in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, imagining the look on Linda's face when the security column started groaning and flashing. It was going to be the best Sunday of my life. Or I was going to get arrested. Honestly, I was fine with either outcome. Sunday mornings in Whispering Willows were a competitive sport. This was the time when the dads emerged from their brick-fronted fortresses to engage in the silent, passive-aggressive warfare of lawn maintenance. If Mr. Henderson mowed his lawn at a diagonal, Mr. Zhao across the street would mow his in a diamond pattern within the hour. If someone washed their SUV, 3 other hoses would turn on immediately. It was a theater of conformity. And I was about to drop a bomb in the middle of the stage. At 9:45 a.m., Sully pulled up. He wasn't in his work truck today. He was in a clean pickup, wearing a polo shirt that was uncomfortably tight around his biceps, and holding a cooler. He walked up the driveway, set the cooler down on my porch, and cracked a soda. "Crowd's forming," he observed, nodding toward the street. He was right. The silver monolith on the curb had generated a gravitational pull. Neighbors were lingering. Walking speeds had decreased by 50% near my house. Mrs. Higgins was visible 2 houses down, pretending to inspect a sprinkler head, but her body was angled entirely toward us. She was wearing her Sunday best, a pastel pantsuit that looked like an Easter egg had exploded, and she was clutching her phone like a holy relic. "She's ready to dial," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "She's got her thumb hovering over the 9. "Let's give her a reason," Sully grinned. We walked down to the curb. The sun was high and bright. Perfect visibility. I stood next to the tarp. I cleared my throat. I didn't make a speech. This wasn't a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It was an act of rebellion. But I did catch the eye of Mr. Henderson, who had stopped his edging to watch. "Sully," I said. "Do the honors." Sully grabbed the bungee cords at the base. Snap! Snap! He grabbed the corner of the heavy silver tarp. "Unveiling in 3, 2, 1. He yanked the tarp upward and back. It slid off with a heavy swish, pooling on the grass. The silence that followed was absolute. It was glorious. Standing on the curb, gleaming in the Sunday sun, was a perfect 1:1 scale replica of a Type 40 TARDIS. The paint, Pantone 2955C, was deep, rich, and authoritative. The white windows were crisp. The police public call box sign was stark and official. The lantern on top was frosted glass. It wasn't just a box. It was a presence. Against the backdrop of beige siding and gray asphalt, the blue was shocking. It looked like it had punched a hole in reality and decided to park next to my driveway. "Holy," I heard Mr. Henderson whisper from across the street. Then, the reaction hit. Mrs. Higgins dropped the sprinkler head. She took 3 steps forward, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. She wasn't screaming yet. She was in shock. The sheer audacity of the color blue seemed to have short-circuited her brain. It's blue," she finally choked out, her voice rising in pitch. "It's blue." "Police box blue, Linda," I called out cheerfully. "Safety color, high visibility." "It's a phone booth," she shrieked, finding her stride. She began marching toward us. "You put a phone booth on the curb. This is not a mailbox. This is commercial signage. This is graffiti in 3D. "It's a secure parcel unit," I retorted. "The aesthetics are simply vintage security chic." Before she could launch into her triad about property values, a white delivery van rounded the corner. It was Sunday, which meant Amazon delivery. The driver was a young guy, maybe 22, wearing a blue vest. He pulled up to the curb, scanning for the house number. He looked at the house. Then he looked at the TARDIS. He hit the brakes hard. The van stopped. The driver stared. He looked at the package in his hand. He looked at the box. A slow, wide grin spread across his face. He practically leaped out of the van. "No way," the driver said, walking up to the curb. "No freaking way." "Morning," I said. "Delivery for 1402? "Dude," the driver said, ignoring me and touching the side of the box reverently. Is this the 2010 Matt Smith version? The St. John ambulance badge is missing, but the window frames are chunky." "Good eye," I said. "Go ahead. Put the mail in. The small door, under the sign." Mrs. Higgins was now standing 5 feet away, vibrating with rage. "Do not encourage this. This is an illegal structure. Young man, do not put that package in there." The driver looked at Mrs. Higgins, then looked at the box. He made the right choice. He reached out and pulled the handle of the small phone panel, which I had converted into the mail slot. This was the moment. The system was armed. As the door opened, a micro switch clicked. Inside the box, the Arduino board woke up. The relays fired. First, the light. The lantern on top of the roof flashed to life, bright white, pulsing rhythmically. Then the sound. The dual marine speakers kicked in. I had the volume set to 7, VWURP. The sound was visceral. It was that grinding, wheezing mechanical groan that every nerd on the planet knows in their bones. VUWURP. WUWURP. The sound echoed off the suburban houses. It bounced off the pavement. It sent a flock of birds scattering from the trees. Then the fog. The high-density fog machine in the roof vented through the hidden slats. A thick, white plume of smoke hissed out, cascading down the sides of the blue box and rolling onto the sidewalk around Mrs. Higgins's feet. "Oh my God!" Mrs. Higgins screamed, jumping back as the fog hit her ankles. "It's on fire! It's exploding! He's bombing the neighborhood!" The delivery driver was laughing so hard he almost dropped the package. He placed the box on the internal tray. As he let go of the handle, the motorized carousel whirred, zzz, chunk, pulling the package into the secure, steel-lined belly of the beast. VUWURP. One full final fade-out groan. The light stopped spinning. The fog dissipated slowly. The driver looked at me. "That," he said, wiping a tear from his eye, "is the greatest thing I have ever seen. Can I take a selfie?" "Be my guest," I said. Mrs. Higgins was already on her phone. She wasn't texting this time. She was screaming into the receiver. "Yes, 911, I need police, fire, hazmat. There is a structure on Whispering Willows Lane that is emitting smoke and terrible noises. It's psychological warfare. He's attacking me with a blue box." She paused, listening to the operator. "No, I don't know if he's armed, but he's smiling. Send everyone." She hung up and pointed a trembling finger at me. "You are finished, Robert. You are done. They are coming to take this down, and they are taking you with it." "I'll put a pot of coffee on," I said. The response time for the Whispering Willows Police Department was surprisingly fast, mostly because nothing ever happened here. Usually, the biggest crime they had to investigate was teenagers skateboarding near the gazebo. 10 minutes later, the cavalry arrived. It wasn't just one car. It was two. Lights flashing, but no sirens. They pulled up at strange angles, blocking the street. The first officer out of the lead car was a man who looked like he had been chiseled out of granite and had absolutely zero sense of humor. He was older, with a flat-top haircut and a mustache that demanded respect. His name tag read SGT, Miller. The second officer, hopping out of the backup car, was younger, Latino, with glasses and a slightly softer demeanor. Officer Rodriguez. Miller walked up the driveway, hand resting near his belt, not on the gun, but in the vicinity. He looked at Mrs. Higgins, who was now crying theatrically near the golf cart. He looked at the fog still drifting on the lawn. He looked at the blue box. "Sir," Miller barked at me. "Step away from the object." "I am away from the object, officer," I said, holding my hands up, beer-free. Sully stayed on the porch, looking amused. Miller approached. He sniffed the air. "Ma'am reported smoke. Is something burning?" "It's theatrical fog, Sergeant," I explained. "Water vapor and glycol, non-toxic. It's a decorative feature of the mailbox." Miller stared at me. "The mailbox?" "Yes, sir." Miller looked at the 6-foot-tall police box. He looked at the tiny black mailbox on the neighbor's lawn. He looked back at the police box. "Sir, that is the size of a refrigerator. Federal-approved dimensions for a large parcel secure unit," I recited. "Would you like to see the permit?" "I want to know why it was screaming," Mrs. Higgins interjected, rushing forward. "Officer, it made a noise, a terrible grinding noise, like a dying animal. It exceeded the decibel limit. I felt it in my teeth." Miller turned to me. "Sir, are you operating a PA system?" "It's an audible delivery notification," I said. "Triggered only when the door opens. Fully compliant with the daytime noise ordinance." Officer Rodriguez had been quiet this whole time. He was walking slowly around the TARDIS. He was looking at the windows. He ran a hand over the wood grain. He peered closely at the text on the front door. "Police telephone free, for use of public." Rodriguez looked up. His eyes met mine. There was a glimmer there, a spark of recognition. "Sergeant," Rodriguez said. His voice was professional, but tight. "Yeah, Rodriguez." "It's a TARDIS, Sarge," Miller frowned. "A what?" "A TARDIS," Rodriguez repeated. "Time and relative dimension in space. It's from a TV show, Doctor Who." "Is it dangerous?" Miller asked. Rodriguez cracked a smile. "Only if you're a Dalek, Sarge." He looked at me. "This is custom, right?" You didn't buy this. The paneling is marine grade. And is that a Fresnel lens on the top light? It is, I said, feeling a surge of camaraderie. And the lock is a Yale latch. Rodriguez shook his head in disbelief. Sarge, it's a replica. It's actually incredible. Mrs. Higgins stamped her foot. I don't care if it's the Statue of Liberty. It's ugly. It's blue. And it made smoke. Cite him. Arrest him. Miller took a deep breath. He was a practical man. He didn't care about time travel. He cared about paperwork. Sir, Miller said to me, do you have a permit for this structure? I do. I reached into my back pocket, slowly, and produced the laminated permit. I also pulled out the HOA binder, tabbed to the relevant sections. Miller took the permit. He read it. He looked at the box. He looked at Mrs. Higgins. Ma'am, Miller said, this is a valid city permit for a masonry and composite security column. The setbacks are correct. The height is... He looked at the box. Big but legal. But the noise, she shrieked. The smoke! Miller looked at me. Can you trigger it again? Sure, I said. But I need someone to put mail in it. The sensor is pressure sensitive. Rodriguez, Miller said. Put your notebook in. Rodriguez beamed. He walked up to the door. He hesitated, savoring the moment. He reached for the handle. Pull to open, Rodriguez whispered. He pulled the panel. He placed his notebook inside. VWWOORP. VDWOORP. The light flashed. The fog hissed. Miller watched, stone-faced. Mrs. Higgins covered her ears. Rodriguez looked like a kid on Christmas morning. When the noise stopped, Miller looked at his watch. 10:30 a.m. Noise ordinance doesn't kick in until 10 o'clock p.m. The duration was less than 10 seconds. He handed me back the permit. Ma'am, Miller said to Mrs. Higgins, it's loud, it's big, and frankly, I don't get it. But it's not illegal. There is no crime here. This is a residential neighborhood, Mrs. Higgins screamed. We have standards. We have an aesthetic. Then take it up with the civil courts or your board. Meetings, Miller said, adjusting his belt. But do not call 911 because you don't like your neighbor's mailbox. That is a misuse of emergency services. If you call us out here again for this box, I will cite you. The color drained from Linda's face. She looked like she had been slapped with a wet fish. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Miller turned to go. Let's go, Rodriguez. Rodriguez lingered for a second. He leaned in close to me. Hey, he whispered. Does it have the swimming pool inside? I'm working on the library first, I whispered back. Rodriguez grinned. Nice. Hey, real quick. He pulled out his phone. He stood next to the box, gave a thumbs up, and snapped a selfie. For the wife, he said. She loves Tennant. Rodriguez, Miller barked from the car. Coming, Sarge. They drove off. I stood there on the curb. Sully was laughing so hard on the porch he was wheezing. Mr. Henderson from across the street gave me a slow, respectful nod. Mrs. Higgins was left standing alone on the sidewalk. The fog was swirling around her ankles like she was the villain in a low-budget horror movie. She looked at the TARDIS. She looked at me. You think you've won, she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine hatred. But the HOA board meets on Tuesday. We will rewrite the bylaws. We will ban this thing. You can try, Linda, I said, patting the side of the blue wood. But you know the thing about this box. What? She snapped. It's been to the end of the universe and back, I said, quoting the show with zero shame. I think it can handle a Tuesday night board meeting. She let out a noise of pure frustration. a VWURRP of her own, almost, and stormed back to her house. I turned to the box. The light on top gave a single phantom flash, likely just a capacitor discharging, but it felt like a wink. "Good girl," I said. Sully walked down with 2 fresh beers. He handed me one. "Well," Sully said, looking at the monstrosity we had created. "We didn't get arrested." "Day's young," I said, clinking my bottle against his. "But for now, we have the most secure mail in the zip code." "You know," Sully mused, looking at the fog machine nozzle, "if we upped the pressure on that smoke, we could probably reach her porch." I looked at Linda's house. I looked at the TARDIS. "Sully," I said, "I like the way you think." The summons arrived on Tuesday. It didn't come via the postal service, presumably because Linda refused to put anything into my blue monstrosity, but was instead taped to my front door with an aggressive amount of blue painter's tape. The irony of her using blue tape was not lost on me. It was a single sheet of heavy cardstock, printed in bold, sans serif font. "Emergency Meeting of the Whispering Willows, Homeowners Association Board. Date: tonight. 7:00 p.m. Location: Community Center, Multipurpose Room. B. Agenda: Emergency Resolution 88Z. The prohibition of non-standard, anachronistic, or sci-fi-themed curbside structures." "She works fast," Sully said, reading over my shoulder. He had stopped by to make a minor adjustment to the fog machine, aiming the nozzle slightly lower for maximum ankle coverage. "Resolution 88Z, I mused. She skipped X and Y. That implies a level of panic I find deeply satisfying. "You going?" Sully asked. "Oh, I'm going," I said, walking to my laptop. "And I'm bringing a projector. If she wants a hearing, I'm going to give her a TED Talk." The Whispering Willows Community Center was a building designed to suck the joy out of the human soul. It smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and judgment. Multipurpose Room B was packed. Usually, HOA meetings were attended by 3 people: Linda, her vice president, a man named Gary who slept with his eyes open, and the treasurer, Mrs. Gable, who was 94 and mostly there for the cookies. Tonight, however, it was standing room only. Word had spread. The Blue Box incident had become neighborhood lore in under 48 hours. People were there. Mr. Henderson was in the front row. The lady with the terrifying chihuahua was there. Even the teenagers who usually smoked behind the tennis courts were lurking in the back, looking unusually interested in municipal politics. I walked in, carrying my laptop and a laser pointer. I sat in the front row, directly opposite the podium. At 7:05 p.m., Linda marched in. She carried a gavel that looked like it was made of mahogany and vengeance. She slammed it onto the table. Bang! "This meeting will come to order," she shouted, though the room was already silent. "We are here to address a crisis of character, a crisis of color." She glared at me. I smiled and gave a little 2-finger salute. "As you all know," Linda continued, pacing the stage, "our community guidelines were written to ensure harmony, sameness, peace. But recently—" She paused for dramatic effect. "A resident has chosen to mock these values. He has erected a structure that is not only an eyesore, but a distraction. A neon blue sarcophagus that screams at innocent mail carriers." A few people in the back giggled. Linda whipped her head around. "It is not funny. It is a slippery slope. Today it's a TARDIS. Tomorrow someone builds a bat cave in their garage, or a hobbit hole in the berm. We must stop this madness now." She clicked a remote. A projector screen lowered behind her. It displayed a blurry photo of my mailbox, taken from a low angle that made it look like it was looming over the street like Godzilla. "I propose Resolution 88Z, she announced, which explicitly bans any structure resembling fictional transportation, time travel devices, or alien artifacts. It also limits the color blue to navy and slate." She looked at the room, expecting applause. She got polite, coughing. "I open the floor to the defendant," she sneered. "Robert, defend your toy." I stood up. I buttoned my blazer. I walked to the podium and plugged my laptop into the HDMI cable. "Thank you, Linda," I said, my voice calm and projected. "But I think you're framing this all wrong." I clicked my remote. The screen changed. It wasn't a photo of the mailbox. It was a graph. A beautiful, rising line graph. Since the installation of the Secure Parcel Unit on Saturday, I began, engagement in our neighborhood Facebook group is up 400%. Foot traffic on Willow Lane has increased by 20%. And most importantly, I clicked to the next slide. It was a selfie of the Amazon driver, grinning next to the TARDIS. "Delivery morale is at an all-time high." "This is nonsense," Linda interrupted. "It's a circus attraction." "It is art, Linda," I corrected. "And it is history. You asked for bold. You asked for stature. The British police box is a symbol of safety and community assistance. It is an architectural classic. Calling it a toy is an insult to mid-century British civic design." I looked out at the crowd. I needed to sway the jury. "Linda wants to ban whimsy," I said. "She wants to ban fun. She wants us to live in a world where every mailbox is a rusted black tin can. But look at us. We're all here. Talking. Connecting. When was the last time this room was full? This blue box hasn't divided us. It has brought us together." I pointed to Mrs. Gable in the front row. "Mrs. Gable, be honest. What do you think of the color?" Mrs. Gable adjusted her glasses. "Well," she quavered, "it's very easy to see. My cataract surgery makes the beige houses look a bit blurry, but that blue, I can see that blue from my kitchen. It's cheerful." "Cheerful," I repeated, pointing at the screen. "Objection, Linda. Mrs. Gable finds it cheerful." "She's 94, Linda shouted. "She thinks the microwave is a television." "I heard that," Mrs. Gable snapped. "And what about the kids?" I asked, gesturing to the back of the room. "You guys seen it?" A kid with messy hair and a skateboard tucked under his arm spoke up. "Yeah, it's sick. I took a pic and got like 50 likes on TikTok. People think our neighborhood is cool now." "Cool?" Linda looked horrified. "We don't want to be cool. We want to be exclusive." "Mr. Henderson?" I pivoted to the swing vote, the man who mowed his lawn with a ruler. Mr. Henderson stood up slowly. He looked at Linda. He looked at me. "Linda," Henderson said, "you fined me $50 last week because my trash can lid was open 3 inches. It attracts raccoons," Linda defended. "And Robert," Henderson turned to me, "your box is loud. It makes a weird grinding noise, and the fog smells like strawberries." "Vanilla," I corrected. "Whatever," Henderson said. "But here's the thing. Since you put that thing up, people slow down. They drive slower to look at it. My kids can play in the front yard without me worrying about speeders. It's a traffic calming device." He looked back at Linda. "I vote we keep it." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. "Keep the box," someone shouted. "It's better than the beige," shouted another. Linda's face went from red to a shade of pale that suggested a total system failure. She hammered the gavel. Bang, bang, bang. "Order! Order! We will take a vote!" she screamed. "All in favor of Resolution 88Z to ban the box and fine Robert into oblivion. Raise your hand!" Linda's hand shot up. Gary, the vice president, looked at Linda, looked at the crowd, and slowly raised his hand halfway, then saw the look on Mr. Henderson's face and put it back down to scratch his ear. Linda stood alone, her arm raised, looking like the Statue of Liberty if the Statue of Liberty hated fun. "All opposed?" I asked. Every hand in the room went up, even Mrs. Gable's, even the teenagers. "Motion fails," Gary mumbled, finally waking up. Linda stared at the sea of hands. She lowered her arm slowly. She looked at me with a mixture of loathing and begrudging respect. It was the look of a general who realizes they have been outflanked by a court jester. "Fine," she hissed. "Fine, keep your time machine. But mark my words, Robert, if that thing attracts one Cyberman, if one Dalek rolls down this street, I am suing you for endangerment." "I have a plan for that, Linda," I smiled. "It's called a screwdriver." She gathered her papers, shoved them into her bag, and stormed out of the room. The doors swung shut behind her with a heavy thud. The room broke into applause. I walked over to Mrs. Gable. "Thank you for your support, ma'am." "You're welcome, dear," she said, patting my hand. "Now, does it actually work? Can I go back to 1952? I had a lovely dress in 1952. "Not yet," I winked. "But I'm waiting on a part." The victory lap didn't involve champagne or parades. It involved a quiet Wednesday evening on the porch. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across whispering willows. The heat of the day was breaking. I sat in my rocking chair, a cold beer in hand. Sully was sitting on the steps, whittling a piece of scrap wood. "So," Sully said, "we beat the system." "We did," I agreed. "We fought the law, and the TARDIS won." "You know," Sully pointed with his knife toward the street, "Henderson is out there washing his car. He just waved at the mailbox." I looked. Sure enough, Mr. Henderson was spraying down his sedan. He paused, looked at the blue box, gave it a respectful nod, and continued washing. "It's a landmark," I said. "We put Whispering Willows on the map." Just then, the faint whine of an electric motor drifted down the street. The red golf cart. Linda was on patrol. She couldn't help herself. It was in her DNA. She drove slowly down the street. She passed the Johnsons' house, grass too long. She passed the Miller's house, garbage cans visible. Then she reached my house. She slowed down. The cart crawled to a near stop right in front of the TARDIS. The lantern on top was glowing softly in the twilight, a steady, comforting white light. The blue paint looked deep and mysterious in the shadows. Linda stared at it. She sat there for a long 10 seconds. I waited for her to yell. I waited for her to measure something. But she didn't. She just shook her head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. She adjusted her visor, hit the accelerator, and whined away down the street, disappearing around the curve. "She hates it," Sully noted. "She despises it," I agreed. "But she respects the paperwork." I took a sip of beer and watched the light on top of the box spin lazily as a timer kicked in. The world is a chaotic, messy, boring place sometimes. It's full of rules and regulations and people like Linda who want to measure the joy out of existence with a ruler. But sometimes, if you have a little bit of spite, a good contractor, and a loophole in Section 14B of the bylaws, you can make a little magic. I looked at my mailbox. It was just wood and steel and electronics. It couldn't travel through time. It couldn't fly. It was, for all intents and purposes, just a box. But looking at it there, defying the beige conformity of the suburbs, I realized the doctor was right. It really was bigger on the inside.